Hello and welcome to Pursue the Talks, brought to you by Pursue, a bespoke leadership coaching and development company with a mission to create, nurture and develop inspiring leadership across the global education sector, supported by the Federation of British International Schools in Asia. Again, please keep feeding back and reviewing on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. We have some great reviews here. I love this one from Dame Vicky Patterson. Take the time to listen to these clear and informative interviews. Thank you very much, Vicky. Very much appreciated. As always, if you'd like to feed into the Pursue conversation, you can visit us on LinkedIn and Twitter at Nicholas Mackay and Pursue, and also visit our website, pursue.com. Today's conversation, I'm excited to welcome Professor Deborah Eyre. Deborah is a global education leader, academic researcher, writer, and influencer focused on helping good schools become world-class. 40 years of her research culminated in the creation of the high-performance learning philosophy and framework, which reimagines education and creates schools where almost everyone performs highly and students are able to perform well in school and later in their lives. In 2015, Deborah founded the High Performance Learning Services Limited to enable schools to adopt the high performance learning approach and become accredited HPL schools. Deborah, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. Really appreciate it.
Fantastic. I was doing the thinking of the show, and fourth series, high performance. And I thought I've got to get Deborah on because she deals every day in high performance learning in schools. So I'm really excited and curious actually to understand what your definition of high performance is.
So high performance, in my definition, is the best in class. So it's what people do who do something at the optimal level. And my particular interest is in learning. So it's what does the very best look like from the best learners. So high performance learning is what you see when you've got optimal learning occurring.
And if you can just take us through in more depth about the framework, values or pillars that go into that approach, Deborah.
Yeah, so I've had a lifetime researching 40 years or so into the whole question of how the most successful learners think and learn. And that's what developed the concept of high performance learning. And it's really got two parts to it. One is the underpinning philosophy. And the underpinning philosophy is that we should now be expecting that just about anyone can achieve high performance in the areas of cognitive development. So they should be able to do well at school. Why didn't we think that before? Well, we thought that some people were born with certain kinds of brains and other people were born with different ones. What do we now know that we didn't know then? We now know the brain is exquisitely plastic and it builds new neural pathways all the time. So we can develop people's brains instead of just having to react to them. And that means it's kind of game on in terms of what you can achieve as a school. Yeah. So now you haven't got all those constraints you thought you had. So it's banished the old bell curve. That's all really old-fashioned stuff. Now it's into the business of how do we signal to everybody in the school and operate as if everyone could be a high performer. But that's part one, is creating that culture and really meaning it. Even the most unpromising kind of person who's currently performing not very well, really meaning that you think that it could come. But then secondly is that that's all very well, but you have to have a way of making it happen. So believing it could happen is step one. Step two is what we call the HPL framework, which are that's the way to build it. So it's the competencies that you need to develop in students and, well, actually in adults as well. But these are the success competencies. This is what people exhibit when they're being successful. And they've got two parts to them. And I usually talk about that from the point of view of it being a bit like the double helix in DNA. One's no good without the other. They both support each other.
Right, okay.
So you've got to learn how to think in sophisticated ways. So, you have to make connections between what you're learning now and what you've learned in the past and all of that kind of thing and make sense of it. But the other side, and we call those the ACPs, the Advanced Cognitive Performance Characteristics, to give them their full name, but ACPs is the way we usually talk about them. And then the other side is what we call the VAAs, the values, attitudes, and attributes. And they're equally important, but the two are interdependent. So what I mean is that you can do all of the thinking in a sophisticated way, but if you give up when the going gets tough, then you're never going to get anywhere. So having the right values, attitudes, and attributes they're about being open-minded, they're about being persistent, they're about being agile in your thinking. And so you have to use the two together. And then we just have a set of ways in which we believe you're most likely to bring that to fruition, which includes I feel very strongly about this, that this is about working with students. So it's with them, not to them. It's their journey, and they need to understand it, and they need to be empowered to know these are the things I'm good at and not so good at. I need to learn how to be better in these particular kinds of cognitive areas. And then secondly, that you need to harness everybody. So you want to be doing this stuff anywhere you can, and that includes at home. So there's many you can help parents make a better contribution to helping their own child be successful. So basically, it's a teacher's agenda. It's not something you can mandate from the top. You have to introduce the ideas and then tell teachers to figure out how to make it work in their context. And the strength of that that's why we call it a framework. It's quite a coherent framework, but there's a lot of autonomy within it. And the strength of that is working in that way. Is that it means you can adapt it for any context, any age group, any curriculum, any language. And one of my school principal colleagues, who is also a dancer, she says she likes it because you're allowed to create your own choreography.
Oh, I like that.
Yes, that's what I think, is that it's not an off-the-shelf, one-size-fits-all. It's a sort of, this is what we know makes success. These are some ways that seem to help you develop it. Now over to you to make it work. And it has to operate across the whole school, because really you want your students to be practicing working in these kind of ways frequently and regularly. So they need to hear the same language everywhere they are in the school around these competencies and at all ages. So if you're teaching, if you're being educated in a through school, you've got the optimal situation because you're experiencing this right the way through your school career. But if you're not fortunate enough for that to be the case, you can pick it up at any time and still get an impact. In the sixth form or in later life, because you could say it's equally applicable in the kind of corporate learning and development world. They're exactly the same competencies all of us need for success, whether we're in school or in the workplace.
That's a question I was going to ask you, actually, because again, obviously you talk a lot about students. Are the same principles relevant to staff or teachers and also school leaders, whether they work, in the UK, internationally, wherever?
Yeah, it definitely, absolutely. And one of the things that's kind of interesting about adopting it as a sort of whole school approach is that everybody starts using the language about each other. So, when you're saying to people, you've got a language to say, well, that's really good linking. You've made a really good connection between this and this, or I really like the way in which you did some flexible thinking there, or some fluent thinking. You just have a vocabulary. It's really the vocabulary of cognition, but you have a vocabulary which makes it easy for everybody to know what you mean. So, you can state that in a staff meeting. You can say, I'm looking for a bit more flexible thinking here. What you mean is, okay. I want some new ideas, and I don't want the same old people saying the same things and objecting to everything else. So it kind of creates it creates a non-threatening way of operating in threatening environments. So whether that's the classroom as a kind of slightly threatening environment for students, or it's the staff room or the senior leadership, or within senior leadership, it just gives you a language which makes it possible to discuss some of the more challenging things without it being uncomfortable or threatening, which is useful.
And in terms of how long this would take, so, obviously you're talking about becoming world-class schools. If there's a school interested in embarking on this journey, how long would this journey take to become world-class? And also, Deborah, is it possible for every school to become world-class?
Well, we believe that everybody has it within them to become high performers. So the obvious answer to that is it is possible for every school to become world class, but it will take some a lot longer than others. So if a school is already in good shape, then it would come in on our World Class Schools Award scheme, and it would take them 2 years to get to first accreditation. That's not to say that they will have completely cracked this. That's just really getting to a point where they've adopted it in the school, but they'll continue to dig deeper to get greater levels of consistency across the school over time. But if your school's not at that state, indeed, even if it's a brand new school, you can start the journey. So we have other ways in which you can come in on schemes where you adopt and you can become, first of all, a high performance learning school, a high performing school, and then move into the world class space. What we're really doing is, in accreditation, we're setting higher standards as a world class standard. But you can pick up the badges along the way, because that's just fundamentally part of our philosophy, is that you don't have to be, it does not matter what your level of performance is right now, provided that you have the level of ambition and the commitment. We think you can get there. And as I say, it will take some schools longer than others.
And in terms of your own journey, Deborah, to running a high performance company, what's been your major influence on your career and your pathway to running your own company and to working with schools globally to be high performing schools?
So, I suppose I started out life thinking that I wanted to make an impact on changing life chances for children and young people. And I haven't really veered very far away from that, except that I've begun to understand that there are mechanisms by which you can make that happen. So if I think about my career, there's probably a couple of people in that process who helped me to make quite big changes in my understanding in terms of the possible. So first of all, I started life as a teacher, but when I moved into the HE sector, I was very fortunate in having a head of the faculty in which I worked, who helped me to understand leadership as a more understand it rather than just do it without really understanding the rules of the game. And he helped me to understand that I could be a leader, and I could be a leader of something big. But subsequently, and I did have some big leadership roles within that kind of an environment. But then subsequently, I sort of slightly switched tack, and I took a role within a global privately owned education company. And I think the CEO of that organisation turned me from being an educator into a businesswoman, in terms of understanding that there are ways in which you can make the things happen that you want to happen by taking hold of it yourself, rather than trying to work within a bigger organisation and influencing others. So I guess the kind of confidence to say I'm going to set something up and make this happen on a global scale came from that experience. And also, I just have to give a nod to my son, who, when I was thinking about whether or not to do this, said, well, he said, I think you've got something really good, it works. He said you could do what all kinds of academics do at your stage in life, and you could be on the conference circuit and travel business class and stay in nice hotels. And then he said you could do a kind of entertaining talk, and I think you could probably manage that. He said, but let me be clear with you that people will come up to you afterwards and say how much they enjoyed it and how much they agree with everything you're saying, but they won't change a single thing in their school, in their work institution, because basically basically what you're offering them is, kind of a utopia, and they can admire it and like it and say, oh, wouldn't it be good if life was like that? But then they go back to base and think, but actually I'm dealing with all of these pressing matters, and I really, I've just got to put all of that to one side. It was like an injection of inspiration. But now I've got to get back to the real world. So he said, so if you really want people to adopt this, you're going to have to help them do it. And I think that was really, you only get that kind of straight advice from people who know you well, or your children, who kind of like sort of shape up here. If you're going to do it, you just got to embrace it and go for it. So I think I'd say that he was probably the cause of me going for it, but I probably wouldn't have felt capable of going for it unless I'd had the experiences I previously had with a global education company and with the CEO there who was understood his job and his role par excellence.
Because we had a quick chat, didn't we, before recording, Deborah, about how important I think we feel that experiences outside of education can be when they're brought in, and vice versa. And I spoke about that with other people on the show, actually, in terms of what you've mentioned there about that kind of business acumen that you brought into education. There's sometimes an easy morphing of business and education, isn't there, and about those values that clash. How much have you learned from other industries in your journey to becoming, a world-class company?
Well, I think that seeing it through other people's lens can be really helpful. So some of the things I've learned from other disciplines, from other sectors, is firstly applying discipline and being, deciding what you're going to do, applying discipline to it, and not being distracted. So there's loads of things that float across your radar that all look really exciting and interesting, and it's very easy to be distracted. So understanding that successful businesses are not distracted is something I think that it doesn't make any difference whether you're working in a commercial environment or a non-commercial environment. That discipline is actually really valuable, because when we're working with schools who are world class, that's one of the things that you see with them. So even now in lockdown, when we have Zoom calls with principals of our schools, it's really interesting. They acknowledge the fact that COVID-19 is causing problems in terms of they have to switch onto online. It's caused problems about staffing, where people are, etc., etc. But they just take it in their stride, in the sense of them not being deflected in any way, shape, or form from what they're doing. So they're creating a quality education for their students, and there are certain contextual things happening in the background which they have to deal with. So that seems to be, quite an important differentiator between them and certain other leaders of organizations who are more in the space of, wringing their hands about the situation in which they find themselves. So I think the kind of that idea that there's a discipline and that steers the things that you do are kind of important. And the other things that I think I've learned from other sectors is around that there are methodologies. So there's quite accepted methodologies for doing things, which in the education space, sometimes we're very discursive and we don't have a particular methodology that we're kind of applying in a systematic kind of way. So I think there's a sort of we can borrow and make our own lives easier by borrowing from other sectors, and sometimes it is quite. I was fortunate enough in terms of doing some leadership development that one of the people in my group was had a position in the armed forces, and when I'm describing about how schools are under pressure, and he's just got back from Afghanistan, the question of how does that work? And so one of the things I said, which was really interesting, because this is what I mean about how you can learn from other contexts. I said, that. We were talking about this discussion about how when you're leading in an organization, the success comes not from yourself, it comes from the other people in the organization. And I was saying that, I imagine that in the armed forces, from my position of complete ignorance, that, there were quite clear instructions about what people had to do. And the response I got was absolutely not. When the situation goes live, your individual people have to make the decisions. So what you have to do is you have to educate them and train them in such a way that they can analyze the situation and make the best decisions. And actually, if I think about school, isn't that what we're trying to get for our students?
Yeah.
That we're in the same kind of way. We're trying to educate them so that when they sit, they're suddenly, the equivalent would be when they go into the exam room and they have to turn over the exam paper and do the exam, that you can't then be alongside them. You have to hope that what you've done is you've educated them in such a way that they can make the right decisions and they've got the right knowledge and skills to do it. So again, I just think that looking outside is really valuable, because it's always tempting to get the comfort of talking to other people who are doing exactly the same thing that you're doing. But I think where you get the development is by talking to people who are doing something different, but where there's some connectivity, because it really challenges your own thinking. And I as you said, and we shared before we did this, there's real value in that, and we don't do it enough. So for me, when I was placed in the corporate environment, it was, I was the educator in a corporate environment, and it was hugely alien and sometimes really uncomfortable. But goodness, did I learn a lot. And I think that that my understanding how other people thought, and then them trying to understand how I thought, and us bringing the two things together is just it strengthens both sides.
And you mentioned there about this potential, there's some uncomfortable situations when you're putting yourself outside your comfort zone. So again, I'm curious to know about maybe some setback or feedback, criticism for a stronger phrase, that has fueled your own learning, Deborah.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit of a curate's egg in terms of whether people want to work for me. So it's because I'm really impatient. So I'm driven in terms of what I want to do, and I think one of the reasons why I've had the level of success that I've had is because I won't be deflected from it. It's going to be successful, and I'm going to make it happen. And that means, I'm quite demanding to work with. And on the one hand, that creates a kind of followership. And there are people who've worked with me in different jobs and come back, and they're always asking, are you doing anything that I can be involved with? But there are other people who find that that it's quite an uncomfortable world in which to work. And I've had that criticism twice, and I try to recognise it, although I wouldn't say I'm as good at recognising it as I should be. But because, I had on the plus side, somebody who said, wherever you are, things happen. And that's what makes it exciting. And that's why I really like working with you. And then another very senior colleague who said, I've come to tell you that I'm going to resign. And I'm resigning because it's like working with you is like a roller coaster ride. And you really have to feel the thrill. You have to really love the thrill of the downhill in order to want to do it. He said, but for me, that grueling uphill is just too much. I'd just rather have something in a bit more steady state. So I think what I've learned is that, I create excitement around what I'm doing, but that's not necessarily sustainable, and not sustainable for everybody. So I've learned that I need other people around me who are more calm in terms of where they're going and what they're doing, and who can mediate that, because much as I'm aware of it and I try to mitigate it, I think understanding yourself is important, but managing yourself is a difficult task, as we all know. So I try.
It sounds as if you're really self-aware of what you need around you. I mean, in what way do you think people think you're demanding?
Well, I think because I suppose because I'm focused on what I want to see as the outcome, and therefore I kind of prioritize that. And sometimes what is necessary in order to achieve that outcome can be demanding. And so, and I'm not, I suppose I'm not as patient as I should be with people when it doesn't happen. So, for example, when schools work with us, I know that what we're doing is very successful, provided that you fully commit to it and do it holistically. But I don't have a lot of time for schools who kind of decide on a whim that they think they might want to do something, but then they're not really going to commit to it. And actually, we try and weed them out at the start, even though you might say, well, why don't we just get as many schools as we possibly can? The answer is we want the right kind of schools, because if you just pay lip service to this, it doesn't give you the outcome that we kind of want to see. But in the same kind of way, when I'm working with my own staff, I like to give them a lot of freedom and autonomy, because that's what I believe in. But for people people who disappoint, I think I find it. Some people want to just feel much safer. They want to feel they're kind of wrapped up and safe, and that you'll help them take their next step, and they're very kind of supported and comfortable. I think whilst I recognise that is the case, and I recognise that sometimes I want to go too fast for them, so I think that kind of person would say, that one of my colleagues used to say, you just always want the moon on a stick. You just always do. So
what's wrong with that, Deborah?
well, there is that, Nick. I'm kind of like, well, you're probably right. But I think, what I do really believe is that I think when you go to work, it should be fun, and you spend a lot of time there. So I think, generally, I think that people have the most fun if they've got a bit of autonomy over what they do. And so other people have said, after they've moved on from working for me, I never really realised, especially young people, more junior staff, never really realised how much freedom you gave us until I moved to a different environment where I just didn't get it. So I think if you like that sort of freedom and autonomy, and you like the excitement of building something game changing, and being at the forefront of everything, then that's the kind of context which I tend to create. On the other hand, that is sometimes tiring and sometimes difficult to sustain over time. And so that's why I think having other people in the team who are who can kind of mitigate that a bit is really important for me. Also, the kind of person who is honest enough to tell you. Part of any kind of person in a deputy type role is that they're brave enough to tell you when you're getting it wrong. So, I do like to have people around who are in that position, and to create that kind of rapport, because I just feel that's kind of part of it's the reality check for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned there about giving people autonomy. What would say? I want to come and work for you, say next week. Autonomy, fantastic. But what would be maybe some non-negotiables in terms of working for you, Deborah?
Well, there's certain things that underpin the way we work. So we always work from the evidence. So I want you to work from the evidence. So don't just, tell people that something will work from the premise of either, I thought about it last night after a couple of drinks, or alternatively, I once did it in my classroom, and therefore it must be applicable to everybody else's.
Yeah.
I want you to understand the evidence and take responsibility for finding out more about it. Go and find the evidence. So, we say we are evidence-based, and we are, and that's why what we do works. So we're not going to compromise on the evidence. I think the other thing I'd be saying to you is that, I really believe that in education, we should be focused on quality. We should be doing it well. And so I'd rather do less and do it well than do lots of it and just pay lip service. So when you come work for me, I want you to think about quality all of the time. And that includes, how you represent yourself, how you represent us as a brand. But we're really fortunate. We work with a whole different range of schools. We've got schools who are very prestigious schools with a very high price point of students going to them. And then we've also got schools who are in much more difficult and challenging circumstances. We're working with a group of schools in Leeds in the UK. Very challenging circumstances, but inspirational leadership. And they want quality. They want to take their schools to the places that these other schools go to. So if you came to work for me, that I would be saying, it's uncompromising. We say we can get you to levels of quality, and that's what we want to see. And then finally, I just think the third thing I'd kind of say is honesty. I'd rather know about it if it's not going well. The thing I don't really like is surprises. I don't really like it when, you kind of kept it under the carpet in the hope that nobody notices, and then suddenly it crawls out with a vengeance. So it's better to be in that sort of situation where you just say this hasn't really worked out, and when you're doing new and experimental things, a proportion of them won't work out. But I think that's part of what I'd be saying to you when you started, is that if we're going to be successful, we have to do that in a kind of no blame kind of way. Better to know, and better to be honest about it. But we are all here to build something good, and that means we are successful if we're all successful. I'm not very interested in creating individual stars. I want it to be a galaxy in our organisation, and for us all to be feeling that success comes by everybody being successful rather than individuals.
It's fascinating stuff. It's wonderful to be talking to you, Deborah. Last question I ask all the guests as like a cadence to the conversations is, what piece of advice would you give yourself at the start of your career?
I think for me it would definitely be that it's exactly the advice that we now give students, which is that you are capable of, you have it in you to do this. I didn't have much self-confidence at all, and when I left school I didn't think I was going to do well, and I don't think they thought so either. But I think if I'd understood that it's more in your own hands, I'd have started earlier on being more ambitious about what I wanted to achieve for myself. So I think in my career, I've been fortunate that at various times there's been other people, especially earlier in my career, the things that made the difference were other people who believed in me before I believed in me. So if I started over, I'd prefer it that I believed in me earlier. It's been a long journey to get there. and that's what I want for students and young people. I want them to believe in themselves and just shortcut all of that.
And if anyone listening to the show wants to get more information, Deborah, on the work that you do, high performance learning, where's the best place for them to look?
Well, we'd be absolutely delighted to hear from you. And our website is www.highperformancelearning.co.uk. Or if you want to email direct, it's just office@highperformancelearning.co.uk. I very much hope that some of you will be interested. We want an education world in the future where everybody's successful rather than just a small proportion. And if you want to get on board and be part of that, we'd love to talk to you.
Deborah, thank you so much for joining me today. Some great stuff, and I'm sure our listeners will get a lot out of the conversation, and I wish you the very best going forward as well.
Thank you, and I've really enjoyed it, and thanks so much for the invitation and the chance to speak.
Pleasure. If you are interested in working with Pursue through our coaching and leadership development packages, or would like to connect to discuss any of the topics on the show, please send me an email at hello@pursue.com or visit our website, pursue.com. You can also follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter at Nicholas Mackay or Pursue. If you enjoy the show, please leave a rating and spread the word. We are proud to be developing a truly global community. Take care and look forward to speaking to you again soon.